Good afternoon. I'm going to call this meeting of the Raleigh City Council Growth and Natural Resources Committee meeting to order. We have two items today: the Environmental Advisory Board Food Procurement and Waste Report, and then we'll have a discussion about green stormwater infrastructure. So I am going to hand it over to Ms. Hayward.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. We have Megan Anderson here, our manager of the Office of Sustainability. She'll come to the podium. She does have a representative from the Environmental Advisory Board with her as well in case there are any questions.
Hello, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Megan Anderson, Head of Sustainability for the city. I'm here with Colleen Sellens, who's our Environmental Advisory Board Chair. And as you know, they recently brought to Council their year-end report and their new work plan that was approved. And so Colleen has a few words to share about the report that they have, and then is here to answer any questions or have a discussion if you'd like as well about that.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you in person. It's kind of nice to get back to the in-person process. I'm sure it is especially so for you. I'm not going to belabor the report because you've all seen it. And I just wanted to say that we do have a series of recommendations that we think the city can move forward on, and that the staff, in fact, are doing some things in that. And Megan can provide more detail if you all want more detail. And specifically our recommendations for addressing the food waste issue. And I should say we did meet with purchasing for the city and also with the convention center, the executive director for the convention center, to hear what they had going on and what some of the constraints were associated with dealing specifically with food waste. But our recommendations in that report include preparation of a sustainable events guide and education opportunities for users based on best practices. Obviously, with COVID, things changed in this arena a little bit, and staff are having to rework some of those. But this is an opportunity to get together some materials that are available to the public, as well as to city staff on how to best manage food waste issues associated with different things that they may be doing. So having a guide available out there would be very helpful, we believe, to all who are engaged in that process. We also suggested that reviews be conducted either through a consultant or internal on the overall food purchasing and waste management internal to the convention center, as well as purchasing and waste management for city events and activities. And I understand from Megan that that's ongoing and that there may be more information that they will be able to share. In addition, we recommended continuing to look for ways to support healthy food choices and actions and access in the city, because that's important for a multitude of reasons, including assuring that all folks have access to food and know where that food can be accessed. And then our final recommendation was to continue to build on partnership with a food bank to address food insecurity issues. So that in a nutshell are our recommendations from the report itself. The report's got a lot more detail in there. But I wanted to go ahead and lay those out specifically and see if you had any questions about that. And I believe we also attached to your agenda today was our work plan, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about our work plan for the fiscal year 22 moving forward. And that's all I have in the way of remarks today.
Thank you, Ms. Sellens. Do committee members have any comments or questions? Councilmember Knight.
Just to comment on, with coming out of the pandemic, I know there was certainly an increase in solid waste because of even more so of the single-use products that a lot of restaurants and bars and other retail went back to, that they moved away from that at some point, at some level. But I hope we start sort of helping to remind them that we can start moving back to less use of single-use products, if that's the right term, but you know what I mean, so that we can and also those that can be recycled and reused. And so the more we can help our businesses and retailers do that, that would be great. Yeah. And also just thank you all for y'all's work, as we talked about at the council meeting. Looks great. Appreciate the partnership between you all, the board, and the sustainability office. So thank y'all for doing that and for keeping us in the loop. And if there's anything we can do to help to move things along, just let us know. So thanks a lot for all your work, Colleen.
Good. Okay. I would echo Councilmember Knight's comments about all of your work. Keep it up, as well as staff with these recommendations. I think they're right on, and I think stuff we're ready to move on if we're not already moving on them. If you need help with any of these, let us know. I don't know that we have anything else. I want to just appreciate your time and coming down today and letting us spend some more time looking at the report, as well as y'all's work plan for coming up, upcoming year. Do we need to approve anything, or?
You do typically approve the board committee commission's work plan, so I think in your report out you could recommend that it be adopted.
So I will move to recommend adoption of the work plan and recommendations. Councilmember Fort seconds. All in favor? Aye. Clerk, that's unanimous. I also need to state for the record that Mr. Cox, Councilmember Cox, is excused and absent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I also just want to say thank you to the staff. They've been doing a yeoman's job and trying to move things forward in spite of all the constraints that everybody's had. So they really do a good job, and I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you. And just we will be sending council, our environmental awards are open again. So on behalf of the board, we'll be sending information to the council staff to give to you to spread the word.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we have our second item.
Yeah, so coming to the podium, I think we have Kevin Boyer. Kevin, are you doing an introduction?
Yes, there will be an opening by two members of the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission, though.
Thanks. Good afternoon. My name is Evan Kane. I am the chair of the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission. Professionally, I am the groundwater program manager for Wake County Environmental Services, and previously have spent a fair amount of time in water resources working for NCDEQ. But I'm here privately, not in my capacity as a Wake County employee. I've served on this commission for about 5 years now. I'm very pleased today to present to you our commission's plan for advancing the use of green stormwater infrastructure in Raleigh. Our commission formed a Green Stormwater Infrastructure Committee in mid-2019 in response to a call from City Council to advance green stormwater infrastructure, or GSI, within the city. That committee was chaired by Mark Senior, an experienced water resources professional and stormwater professional who will address you in a moment. The Commission's plan focuses on 6 actions with the overarching theme of advancing GSI by leading by example. So setting up the city as a real leader in the field of GSI and encouraging the private sector to follow in the city's footsteps. And the plan, I think, through the work of the committee, the leadership of Mr. Senior and the city's stormwater staff, has identified some very practical approaches and recognizes some realities of a change in mindset that must occur by program managers, project leaders, and developers in order to incorporate GSI into their plans. I welcome the committee's questions today. I will hand off to Mr. Senior, who chaired the committee, to provide you a little more background.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Mark Senior. Some of you may remember me. I was here a long time ago. I served on the SMAC for the past 4 years. most recently as the chair of the GSI subcommittee. I worked for the city for 32 years in the stormwater division, retired in 2015 and went into private practice. I'm still working with municipalities, but Raleigh and other ones across the state. But based on my long tenure with the city, I had the unique opportunity to observe the progression of stormwater management in the city over those years. And I just wanted to share that it started out in Raleigh that when we were doing development, we just made sure that developers put in a big enough channel and big enough pipes to handle the new runoff from the upstream development so that people wouldn't flood. That was stormwater management 32 years ago. Subsequent to that, we realized that probably wasn't the ideal way of doing things because people downstream were still flooding, streams were eroding. So we had to come up with something new and better. And so we implemented stormwater management, which controlled the peak runoff from new development, captured that runoff and let it release more slowly so people didn't flood, and hopefully the streams weren't damaged as severely. Subsequent to that, we got into the water quality game, where we realized that the runoff from new development was polluting the downstream resources, impacting people who live downstream, the people that draw water from the Neuse River. We're seeing the pollutants from Raleigh, and so we implemented a program where devices would have to be installed to capture the runoff, treat it before it was released. And that was the state of the art at the time. The next step was what was already described as low impact development or green stormwater infrastructure, which accomplishes both tasks. You try to regulate the stormwater discharge and actual volume of water discharge and not just the peak flow. And it captures pollutants at the same time. And it does that through emulating natural processes, infiltrating that water into the ground, capturing it and infiltrating it to the air, reusing it to irrigate things. And so it mimics the natural processes and accomplishes a lot of things at one time. Unfortunately, that's something new. It's not well understood, and so the development community has been slow to embrace that. And it's not been a mandated program as some of the other ones have, and so it's been slow to take off. So in an effort to kickstart that and get people more interested, more apt to implement GSI, we've worked with the Raleigh staff to develop a program to implement and demonstrate to the development community, others, the value of GSI, practicality of it. And so the Stormwater Advisory Committee worked with the staff to develop this plan, build knowledge, provide examples for people to look at, get them more comfortable with the idea of GSI. And so staff has prepared that plan, and we're going to turn it over to Kevin Boyer, let him discuss the details of that plan. And of course, we'll be here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Kevin Boyer. I'm Water Quality Manager in the Stormwater Management Division. Madam Chair, we have a presentation similar to the one given on June 1st. We could proceed with the presentation, or if you'd like to go straight to questions and discussion, we could do that.
Do you committee members have a preference?
If you don't mind, Madam Chair, maybe run through it quickly. There's some folks in the audience that maybe didn't see the presentation and may be interested in it.
Happy to do
That'd be
that.
great.
Here are the 6 city action items, but before I get to those, would like to give some context and background for how we got to where we are. And our general outline will be just what is GSI?
Will you speak closer to the mic? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Thank you.
The first is what is GSI, Green Stormwater Infrastructure? Where have we been with GSI in Raleigh over the last 10 or 15 years? And then the 6 city action items that you have in your packet you received on June 1st City Council meeting. Basically, GSI is about the fate of rainfall. We know where it comes from, and we have a sense of where it goes. Where it goes, we generally think of in terms of kind of 3 slices of the pie of rainfall. It can go to runoff, and that's where most of our work is done. It can go to infiltration in the ground, which is where Mr. Kane's day job has him occupied, or it can go to the air through evaporation and transpiration. And this diagram shows that in a natural setting like a wooded land, the majority of the rainfall does not go to runoff. Only maybe in this case, maybe 10% goes to runoff, very little. And most of it maybe goes to infiltration, or at least nearly half would go to infiltration in this example, and some into the air through evaporation and transpiration. And then as the land is developed, as the spongy soils are removed, the tree canopy removed and replaced with pavements and buildings, and the percent impervious goes up, well, the amount of runoff goes up. And to the point where with a downtown development, lots of impervious surface might see 5, 6, 7 times as much runoff from the same storm. And that results in not just more runoff volume, but higher rates of runoff, flashier flows as we call it, stream bank erosion, stream bed erosion, flooding, as streams that did not evolve to carry that flow are overwhelmed, and aging and sometimes in poor condition infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, is overwhelmed, resulting in flooding. And current regulations address only the peak flow for most developments, as well as managing the nutrients, the concentration of nutrients leaving the site. Does not address the volume of stormwater runoff. So GSI, as a working definition, is the practices that reduce stormwater runoff by promoting infiltration and evaporation, taking advantage of existing features, that is, use what you can where you can, leave it in place, and install new features where you can't that mimic nature. And the idea then, going back to the pie graph model, for the first, say, 1.5 inches of rainfall, which is over 90% of the storms in Raleigh, and represents over 90% of the annual stormwater volume in Raleigh. The idea is to push the pie graph more in the direction of the natural condition rather than the developed condition, even though it is developed. Just a note on a term you may hear in our in the memo to the City Council, but also just out in the industry, is gray infrastructure versus green stormwater infrastructure, where gray infrastructure is usually taken to mean the conventional stormwater infrastructure, where we control peak rates of runoff and reduce pollutant loads, as opposed to GSI, where we eliminate the runoff, at least for that first 1.5 inches or so, and the pollutants that would go with that runoff, primarily by putting it in the ground, infiltrating it into the ground, which also raises the water table and can supply stream flows in dry periods during the summer. Many of you probably heard of streams that used to flow in the summer, no longer flow in the summer. Part of the reason, a good part of the reason for that, is that the groundwater table is depressed by removal of the spongy soils, the tree canopy, and replacement with impervious surfaces. Let you fill you in on where we have been in the last 10 or 15 years with GSI by this timeline, even though it goes back with the city beyond 2010. Mark would probably tell you 2003, 2005, maybe something like that, when the city first started talking about and working with LID, low impact development. A slow start in those years, and then around 2011, the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission started taking more interest in it and made some recommendations to City Council. Council approved bringing on a consultant, which is Tetra Tech, was and is. Tetra Tech has been on board since 2013 and has worked with the city and a number of task forces and work groups to prepare a work plan, which was presented to council in 2016, approved by council in 2016. And we since have been working to develop our capacity and implement that work plan up to 2019. In May, the commission received a direction from City Council to come back with recommendations for making GSI mandatory in land development in Raleigh. That was later changed in August of 2019 to come back with a plan for continuing to advance the use of GSI in Raleigh. And we and the commission reported to City Council on June 1st and now to the committee today. And we've been at work as we build capacity and build projects. Maybe 140 or more projects on the ground. Most of those are through our small sort of a grant program, funding assistance program we call Rainwater Rewards. Over 100 projects there, including the green roof at Raleigh Union Station. We have done projects and helped roadway design and construction on about 15 roadway projects, others under design now, a number in parks, and several at fire stations. And now on to the plan of 6 action items. The first of which is to lead by example. One thing that became apparent to the commission and staff through this process is that the city is not just a regulator of stormwater, not just an advocate for cleaner stormwater or healthier streams, but the city is also an owner, a builder, an operator of facilities, what we would call a developer in the private sector. And we are subject to the same regulations as the private sector. Now, those regulations do not require treatment of runoff from existing impervious surface. So much of downtown, including this site where we are now, will not have required stormwater treatment. But there's nothing to stop the city from going above and beyond. And that's what action item 1 recommends, that the city treats stormwater even where it's not required, and to the extent possible, use GSI. And we have, with the commission, drafted a policy for doing that to help staff know when and how to consider GSI on all CIP projects that disturb the land. We've tested that policy on 2 sites under design, the Civic Campus and Chavis Park, and the next steps are to vet the policy through management and put it into place, put it into practice, probably later this year. Action 2 is to work with developers on support and incentives. In 2017, a number of changes were made to the UDO to strive to make GSI more accessible, more user-friendly, but we've not seen the kind of interest in GSI from the private sector that we'd hoped. So we need to get back with them, find out why, what can be done with what we have already done with the UDO in that regard, and what more could be done. Also, not just the UDO, but what we do administratively in processing applications and issuing permits. Toward that end, we have well, I'll call a new staff position, but it's really a conversion of an existing staff position in stormwater management called GSI Advocate, whose job it will be to work with the developer, designer, in working through the system and encourage the use of GSI and not make it off the menu as it has been, but try to get it on the menu and more accessible for future projects. We also want to convene a stakeholder group with developers and designers to explore those ideas. We did that in 2015, 2016. We did not have strong participation by the development community. We'd like to improve on that this time. The third action has to do with rezoning cases. Almost every rezoning case has some issue around stormwater. Sometimes stormwater quantity, sometimes quality, sometimes both. And that's often becomes an issue for the developer and non-city stakeholders to negotiate. The city can help facilitate that discussion, and one way that we can further help is, we think, to prepare a menu of GSI-based conditions for developers and stakeholders to consider taking to the table, rather than starting from scratch. And starting from scratch often includes agreeing on vocabulary, just what is it we're talking about and how do we talk about it. So getting some of that down early, we've started some of that, and would like to advance that further. We also would like to increase the involvement of stormwater staff in rezoning cases, earlier involvement as well. The fourth action is to include GSI in cities' planning reports. And I should mention that not only in this action, but in all the others, we have been doing much of what we're already talking about for some time. We're talking about doing it differently, or upping our game, or getting more involvement in these actions. In this case, the Midtown St. Albans report was a great example of GSI in that planning document. The same is being done for the Dix Edge study. As we speak, we'd like to see that become more routine and systematic, and propose getting together a work group within the city to make sure that's considered early and often in the planning process. And the fifth action is to look at the UDO one more time. This is related to the second action item. This one, though, is focused more on internal examination of the UDO, and then bring in stakeholders to look at changes. The one in the second action has to do with a broader look, not just at the UDO. This one is focused on the UDO. This was done in 2015 and 2016, and the report that you see there on the slide was the output, and led to the 20 or so revisions to the UDO adopted by City Council in 2017. And the sixth action has to do with, once it's on the ground, we need to maintain it, take good care of it, where it's visible and where it's not. And there are a number of these city-owned stormwater control measures, some of which are GSI, not all of them, and more coming every year. And so we need to make sure we have the program in place, the budget, the people, the resources, the awareness of that it's important that these not only function well, but they look good in order to be aesthetic amenities, in order to gain the support that we'd like to see for more GSI in the city. Again, part of leading by example. That's the extent of our presentation. There again are the 6 action items, and we're happy to answer your questions or provide additional information.
Thank y'all. I'm going to open it up for council questions, and then I believe we have some folks in the audience who may have some public comment. Council members, do you have any questions or thoughts at this time?
I have one question. In your presentation, you mentioned that the GSI was mandated in March of 2019, and then it was modified. The policy was modified for it to be considered a few months later. Do you know why that change was made?
In May of 2019, the direction that came to the commission was to come back with recommendations for making GSI mandatory in land development in Raleigh, and it was changed in August. I think there was some feedback from the development community about that. Also, some discussion on the statutory level about whether cities or the city of Raleigh and municipalities in general have authority from the state to mandate that. And before that was very thoroughly vetted, the mandate from, or the direction from City Council was changed. So we didn't pursue that further.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Boy, I have one question for now. I'll have more later. On the action number 5 about proposing additional UDO text changes, we all know how long new text changes come to take, and I'm wondering if we have a timeline for that in mind.
We don't. We agree that it's a long timeline, not just the process of getting the text change, but the process of agreeing on what the text change might be. That is a stakeholder involvement. So no, it's just, frankly, at this point, getting these ideas on the table, getting feedback, getting direction, and then we'll make that timeline.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Knight, anything before?
Again, excuse me, thanks for the work that y'all have done on this from staff and also obviously from SMAC, and appreciate y'all's leadership on this, Mr. Senior and Mr. Kane. Well, a couple comments, and then I think I want to have a deeper conversation on the incentive versus requirement issue. Maybe to start it, City Attorney, is it? Do you understand if there's any state law preventing? I'm not sure the way you put it, Mr. Boyer, that the city has an authority to be able to require GSI in all or certain types of projects or all types of projects. Do you?
I haven't looked at that specifically. I'm not sure. Did you work with someone in my office about that?
Yes, Dan McClawhorn did comment on that. It was not a lengthy deliberation. He did write an email or two to us. I think part of it was statutory, part of it was political, and having to do with, how would that sit with those who write the statutes.
And I haven't looked at it. I'm glad to review it. If you could send it my way.
Okay, would be happy to do that.
Maybe some audience members may have some thoughts from a state level perspective on that in a second.
Well, the general rule is, you have to have direct authority or implied authority, and so we just have to look at that specifically. And if Dan's looked at it, I'll just take a look and make sure that it's timely and up to date.
Hi, Wayne Miles, Stormwater Program Manager. If I could add one amendment to that as well, and Kevin mentioned this in his presentation, but there is a current state statute that existing impervious area cannot be regulated by mandating any types of stormwater requirements, not just green stormwater infrastructure. That was passed about 3 years ago, and that is one of the hindrances that the City Attorney's Office had brought up during that previous 2019 discussion, was that any mandates of green stormwater infrastructure would bump up against that regulation that says we are not allowed to regulate existing impervious area with stormwater requirements.
Meaning it would have to be only with new developments? No.
Yes, sir. New development, or for example, if a site is redeveloped, we can only regulate on the increase in the impervious area. So if a site is highly impervious already, like many downtown sites are, they essentially need no stormwater controls, and it's not something that we would be allowed to even require under state law.
Okay, thank you. So, Steph?
Yeah, that's pretty standard, that if something's already built, we can't come back and make them put in something new unless you get to a certain point of development. And this is a little bit stricter because it's only the additional part, as opposed to if you wiped it out and started from scratch, which normally would trigger more.
Thanks. Okay. As y'all probably can attest, stormwater runoff is probably the #1 continuing issue that comes to me from my constituents, usually private residential developments, et cetera. So I appreciate the work that y'all been doing on this, and again, I think we want to continue to work on it. I think we do want to look at the potential opportunities for required versus incentives. I think that's still something we should be thinking about and looking at it, and I think we'll maybe work with the city attorney to look at that to make sure we are clear on where and when and how we could do this if we wanted to.
Something I can add to that conversation is when we were looking at implementing this, and there was a discussion of making it mandatory. One of the things we did is we looked at other communities across the state where they have implemented GSI and made it mandatory. And what we found is that it doesn't work in all cases. And so what a lot of those communities have done is quickly backpedaled and said, okay, well, we'd like to make it implement partially mandated. So some of the project would follow GSI, other would follow more traditional stormwater management. And so before we wanted to make something like that mandatory, we take a hard look as to where there are limitations are implementing it, where it may be appropriate, where it would not be appropriate. And so we wouldn't put people in an awkward position of requiring them to do something that's not practical or too costly, that kind of thing.
Well, before you step away, I guess I have a follow-up to your comment. So when you said it didn't work very well and people backed off of it, what were some of the problems in terms of making it mandatory?
I think the biggest problem is green stormwater infrastructure is designed to work primarily with small, more frequent storms where you can infiltrate that water into the soil fairly readily. When you have larger storms, it overwhelms the soil and you can no longer infiltrate it, so it's impractical in that situation. It's also impractical to a great extent where you have highly clay soils that are impervious themselves. They don't infiltrate water very rapidly, and so you run out of opportunities to how you can implement GSI, which one of the primary functions is to infiltrate it into the ground. Where you lose that opportunity, you have to find another way of dealing with that stormwater, and there's not that many. You can capture it and use in cisterns and re-irrigate with it, things like that, but it becomes very expensive very quickly if you can't simply infiltrate it into the soil. And those are some of the impediments that people were encountering trying to make it mandatory.
Mr. Singer, during this process, did y'all look at other cities in North Carolina and particularly North Carolina, around the same size as us, and what have they done or been able to do both legally and regulatorily? We did, and the consultant did. I don't think any of the other major cities of our size are making GSI mandatory. Most of them, it's an option. I think Huntersville was one of the communities that had implemented it and quickly backed off on it. Kevin may recall what other smaller communities were looked at.
I think Huntersville is the only one that comes to mind, and they did modify their program to make it more implementable. It was, but they are seeing a very large increase in a certain kind of GSI, and because of their their ordinance, and that's bioretention is what it's called, big rain gardens. We did look at other cities. Most other cities are doing demonstration projects, often with grants, projects here and there. I don't know of another North Carolina city that is building the capacity in the way that Raleigh is, and changing ordinances and being very, very proactive in implementing GSI. They're certainly doing GSI, but more on a project by project level rather than anything systematic. Around the country, there's lots of use of GSI. It began in cities with combined sewers. If we know, what that is. That's a pipe in the ground that takes both sewage and stormwater in the same pipe. And when it rains, the sewage goes into the ocean or the bay or the river. And so they're under regulatory mandates, court orders, to clean that up, which is outrageously expensive. And that's really how low-impact development, or GSI, got its start, in looking for ways not just to reduce the overflow, but to reduce the amount of water going into the pipe that causes the overflow. We don't have that problem. We don't have combined sewers, but we are benefiting from the lessons learned by those combined sewer overflow communities.
One last comment. Just you mentioned rain gardens, and I think residential rain gardens are a big tool that we have to work on this issue with. I just want to make sure. I've heard lately some concern about we're not making it as accessible or easy to do. I just want to make sure we're doing all we can to incentivize the use of private residential rain gardens as much as possible. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I do want to recognize we have a couple folks in from out of town who are here. I don't know if you all wanted to share any comments with us at this time, or if you're just coming to hang out because you're in Raleigh. But I wanted to open up the mic if y'all have any thoughts or questions. Good afternoon, Mr. Miller.
Hi, my name is Todd Miller. I'm actually the executive director of the North Carolina Coastal Federation, and you're probably wondering why I'm here. But we, over the last year or so, have worked on a project with the Pew Charitable Trust, and Yaron Miller and Christine Huber are here from D.C. Today we were down in the legislature talking with folks about some of the appropriations that are forthcoming for stormwater management and flood control and resiliency. And our interests have been to try to promote the nature-based stormwater strategies across the state. We set up a planning process about a year ago, started just before COVID hit, to develop an action plan that would try to advance nature-based strategies. And we had 4 work groups. We had one that looked at new development, one that looked at existing development, another looked at transportation, highways, and a 4th one that looked at working lands. And Kevin was one of our members. We had about 60 stakeholders from all over the state: farmers, foresters, developers, engineers, government officials. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of that process. And one of the key ones was that government, whether it's state government or local governments, should really lead by example. So I'm here on behalf of the Coastal Federation to really thank you for considering these initiatives and trying to move them forward. We're on the receiving end on the coast, both flooding wise as well as water quality. We know like our fisheries is very much influenced by nutrients that get into our Neuse River and come down, and what goes in the river up here actually does make it to our estuaries. So it's important that we find ways to, I think as Kevin put it, try to replicate the natural hydrology to the maximum extent that can be done. And you're not, what you're doing is really pioneering work on behalf of local governments to do this. The federal government has set a similar standard for federal activities and federal construction, actually dating back to 2007. It's been a guiding philosophy in terms of federal dollars that get spent on federal construction projects. So doing something like that at a state level and the local level is really important, because it's the early adopters that then eventually influence the mainstream in terms of practice. We've seen that over the years. David will remember with living shorelines on the coast, where there were just a few people that started doing it, it became more prominent. There was a lot of research that looked into the effectiveness of those, and now it's really, the regulatory structure was aligned not to mandate them but to facilitate their development, and then they've really taken off like wildfire in terms of a nature-based strategy for shoreline erosion. And I think that's the model with these types of practices. There are a bunch of recommendations, but one thing I would just say that the work you're doing will position Raleigh in a good place to take advantage of federal and state resources for stormwater projects to deal with those existing stormwater issues. The legislature and Senate budget that just came out yesterday has $100 million for going to Department of Environmental Quality to finance stormwater projects for local governments. So once you have your plans together and your strategy together, the folks that are well organized on that are likely to be able to take advantage of that pretty quickly. And there's hope that if we get good projects as a result of that funding, that will become a reoccurring amount of money or maybe grow. So again, all this is really important what you're doing, and I just wanted to applaud you for it. So.
Thank you so much, Mr. Miller. I see Councilmember Knight has a question or
Comment
thought.
is, it's like old homeschool day, I guess, with Mr. Miller here, and Ms. Sullins here, and Mr. Cade here, and Mr. Senior. Y'all have all done a lot of work over the years for the state and environmental protection, so thanks for being here today, and all of y'all being involved from a volunteer side, a nonprofit side, and making the work, helping the work of Raleigh, but also even more importantly of the state as a whole. So thank you all for all of that. And it's good to see everybody in person for the first time in a long time. Just a couple of thoughts or comments from y'all's work. I know y'all have been looking at this from a coastal perspective, but really it could be used, GSI, the way y'all have been looking at it anywhere. How have y'all found the best way to sort of proceed on this in terms of working with the stakeholders, developers, home builders, and that type of thing? Sort of directly, from a state level, or more you think should be really focusing on our own home builders and developers and just really having that direct conversation? Because I'm glad that they're talking about starting convening a working group that we haven't done in a while to really interact with them and kind of help bring them on board.
One of the things that you may have run into Burroughs Smith, who is a big developer in the Wilmington area, but he was one of the stakeholders on this group, and he said among the development community, they really needed more peer-to-peer communications. It's fine to meet with environmental groups or government officials, but it's when they start sharing their successes or war stories, that's a good way to get them on board. He found by using these methods, he saved a huge amount of money. He didn't have to put in all these stormwater ponds and hard infrastructure. He made the landscaping of his community his stormwater system, so it's the aesthetics of his community, and it's selling like hotcakes. So that's the type of successes that you need. Somebody that's in the business telling other people that are in the business, and
Right.
And I think the more you can foster that type of dialogue, because you do have a lot of examples of projects already done in the city, but around the state, and that's something we want to work on too in terms of implementing this action plan to make sure that dialogue is continuing. So
It does seem like a lot of it is education, and that may be best done in direct with them, because I think our home builders and developers are up to it, but some may not be used to it. It's a new thing to some, and have that educational period to work with them.
And sites are important. I mean, there's degrees of this type of infrastructure that can be pretty much done anywhere. NC State did a study over in Durham looking at the difference in runoff volume by just moving the downspouts from going into people's driveways into the lawns, and it was like a 90% reduction in the volume of water actually getting into the storm drains. So, and that's on clay soils. But that may not be enough under if it's for new development or a regulatory permit, but for anything you can do with the existing land uses that moves us in the right direction is going to be helpful. And there's programs out there, in terms of getting the state support or federal support to help finance it. It doesn't have to be a total local burden in terms of financing it. Particularly with all the resiliency dollars, that are, as we have more, natural disasters and other things. I mean, there's nature-based strategies are the buzzword now with FEMA and all the HUD, and the more you're ready to pounce on those opportunities, I mean, you could do this on a very large scale. So
simultaneously, we've been doing work on floodplain work led by Chair Stewart, and I hope y'all are aware of that. And if you have any ideas as we move forward on that aspect of this larger issue, certainly let us know.
Sure.
But I think we're moving forward in a good direction on that as well. So they play in together, obviously.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks for being here. Good to see you.
Okay.
Take care.
I've got just a summary of the report and a fact sheet. I can just leave with you. It's just two handouts. But
Okay. All right.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I do have, did anybody else want to speak, or y'all? Okay. I did want to ask staff one more question, and it kind of piggybacks off of the question we've been asking about mandatory versus advancing GSI. And I think we understand the nuance, and we'll have the attorney's office kind of look at it again. And I love this comprehensive approach. I love that the Coastal Federation and Pew are on board with this approach. It does strike me that we've seen a couple times before that when we have stakeholder processes, sometimes solutions are watered down a little bit by the time they come to us as council. And so I would like to use this moment to ask staff and SMAC, were there any solutions that y'all were excited about that you think would be really great and would work here that maybe some of our stakeholders weren't interested in trying, that at this point you would either like us to consider or bring back later because of politics involved in discussions? If that doesn't make sense, if my question was asked really oddly, I'm happy to rephrase, but I'm hoping you're picking up what I'm saying.
No, I think we understand the question. So I was not directly involved in the previous stakeholders group in 2015 and 2016. But in more recently, there have not been any significant major proposals that were tamped down in any way. In fact, with this plan and with the momentum we're gaining, we're already seeing opportunities as part of other text changes to implement the GSI components as they come up. I think a very good example of that is the amenity area text change that had recently come up before you. Planning engaged us in that conversation, seeing the opportunity for GSI to be incorporated, and the language that's being proposed as a part of that text change really increases the flexibility and the use of GSI significantly. For that purpose. So I think those kinds of opportunities will continue to arise in a variety of areas. And now that there's an increased awareness of GSI, I think that the development community will see us leading by example and start bringing up even more ideas. So as Mr. Boyle proposed, we're actually plan to convene another stakeholders group, and we do anticipate we'll get a lot more interaction, a lot more participation from the development community. We're already seeing more interest in that they are coming to us with ideas, so we're very encouraged by that.
I think that's great. And I just want to emphasize that this council, and I think I can speak for all of us, that at least on this committee, we are very interested in stormwater issues and flooding issues. And so anything that you think we should be considering, we're ready, we're eager for it. So thank y'all for your continued work. Thanks, SMAC, for y'all's continued work. This is great stuff. I love to hear that Raleigh's a leader. That's awesome.
Thank you very much for the support. We appreciate it. And we do appreciate one other quick note. In the budget that you all passed for FY22, it does have that first increment of funding that we can put toward implementing GSI on city projects. So we appreciate your support on the budget side as well.
Awesome. Councilmember Ford.
Yeah, you kind of took one of my points. But Mr. Miles and I spent a lot of time in the community doing some other stuff, and we've had a number of conversations about innovations that some other cities are doing that, maybe some good workable models for the city. So I was going to say, feel free to bring those forward. Don't be shy about that, because I think it would be helpful for us to use your knowledge base in terms of what's working well in other communities, so we can implement those strategies here. So that's all I was going to say.
Just wanted to respond. Great question you have, Ms. Stewart. Going back and conjured up a lot of old memories when we first started this process, and what resistance we got from the development community. And really, the development community was concerned about a mandate that we had to do it this way. Their position was, tell us what we need to do, but don't tell us how to do it. So there wasn't a lot of resistance there. Where we did get resistance was from our own internal group, where some of the components of LID would be narrower streets and no curb and gutter. And so we had some pushback from the fire department, concerned about being able to turn around large fire trucks on narrow streets. and from Public Works trying to maintain non-curb and gutter streets, road ditches, and the edge of the pavement that deteriorates and things like that. So, those are some of the components of LID or GSI that there was a little bit of resistance on, and with good, good arguments. So, those are some things we had to work our way through. And that was part of the stakeholder process where initially, all the other city departments were involved in that process.
Thank you. Councilmember Knight, anything further? All right. Well, I think this was a great discussion. I do believe we have one quick motion to, I would like to move to support staff and their implementation of this plan. Councilmember Ford, second. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Clerk. Anything else for the good of the order?
No, and with these two items being reported out, you don't have any other work plan items in queue.
Great. So we will not have a meeting over break. Yes. I think we'll be good. All right. Well, with that, then we are adjourned. Do I need to gavel to adjourn? It's been a long time.